am neither Democrat nor Republican. In fact, because of my past, my right to vote has been restricted. Thus far, I have never paid attention to a political race in my life. Ironically, I think that makes me the perfect person to speak about this because fentanyl transcends partisanship and ideology, gentlemen and women. This is a totally different problem. And I was speaking outside to the media, and I gave them a statistic that said 190 people a day overdose and die every single day in the United States of America. That is about a 737 plane. That's what about a 737 aircraft can carry. Could you imagine the national media attention it would get if they were reporting that a plane was crashing every single day and killing 190 people? But because it's 190 drug addicts, we don't feel that way. Because America has been known to bully and shame drug addicts instead of dealing and trying to understand what the actual root of the problem is with that. But the sad news is that that narrative is changing too, because the statistics say that in all likelihood, almost every person in this room has lost a friend, family member, or colleague to the disease known as addiction. I've attended more funerals than I care to share with y'all. This committee, I could sit here and cry for days about the caskets I've carried of people I loved dearly, deeply, in my soul, good people, not just drug addicts, uncles, friends, cousins, normal people.
Joining us, Mr. Jason Jelly Roll DeFord is a two-time Grammy nominee and CMT Music Awards winner. He sings about and advocates for those facing drug addiction. He consistently speaks directly with and for people struggling with addiction across the nation. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for serving your nation. Start with Mr. DeFord. Welcome. For your first committee hearing, I assume.
Forgive me, I'm a little nervous. I'm used to having a rock and roll band behind me when I have a microphone in front of me. During the time that I've been given to share my testimony here, I think it's important to note before I start that in these 5 minutes I'll be speaking that somebody in the United States will die of a drug overdose, and it is almost a 72% chance that during those 5 minutes it will be fentanyl related. Having started that way, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and esteemed committee members, thank you for having me. I know this is a bit of a curveball, but I like a little baseball myself. My name is Jason DeFord, but to most I am known as Jelly Roll. It is important to establish earlier that I am a musician and that I have no political alliance. I am neither Democrat nor Republican. In fact, because of my past, my right to vote has been restricted. Thus far, I have never paid attention to a political race in my life. Ironically, I think that makes me the perfect person to speak about this because fentanyl transcends partisanship and ideology, gentlemen and women. This is a totally different problem. And I was speaking outside to the media, and I gave them a statistic that said 190 people a day overdose and die every single day in the United States of America. That is about a 737 plane. That's what about a 737 aircraft can carry. Could you imagine the national media attention it would get if they were reporting that a plane was crashing every single day and killing 190 people? But because it's 190 drug addicts, we don't feel that way. Because America has been known to bully and shame drug addicts instead of dealing and trying to understand what the actual root of the problem is with that. But the sad news is that that narrative is changing too, because the statistics say that in all likelihood, almost every person in this room has lost a friend, family member, or colleague to the disease known as addiction. I've attended more funerals than I care to share with y'all. This committee, I could sit here and cry for days about the caskets I've carried of people I loved dearly, deeply, in my soul, good people, not just drug addicts, uncles, friends, cousins, normal people. Some people that just got in a car wreck and started taking a pain pill to manage it. One thing led to the other. And how fast it spirals out of control, I don't think people truly understand. So many people. Equally, I think it's important for me to tell y'all that I'm not here to defend the use of illegal drugs. And I also understand the paradox of my history as a drug dealer standing in front of this committee. But equally, I think that's what makes me perfect to talk about this. I was a part of the problem. I am here now standing as a man that wants to be a part of the solution. I brought my community down. I hurt people. I was the uneducated man in the kitchen playing chemist with drugs I knew absolutely nothing about, just like these drug dealers are doing right now when they're mixing every drug on the market with fentanyl, and they're killing the people we love. I'll be honest with y'all, my desire is to only get older and only do better and be better. I believed when I sold drugs genuinely that selling drugs was a victimless crime. I truly believe that, y'all. My father always told me what doesn't get you in the wash will get you in the rinse. Now I have a 15-year-old daughter whose mother is a drug addict. Every day I get to look in the eyes of a victim in my household of the effects of drugs, every single day. And every single day I have to wonder if me and my wife, if today will be the day that I have to tell my daughter that her mother became a part of the national statistics. History repeats itself, gentlemen. Even in the 1990s, crack cocaine had long made its way into my middle lower class neighborhood. And at that moment, even as a teenager, you could have never convinced me in that moment that there would be a far bigger problem on the horizon in the form of a pharmaceutical drug. And then I watched opioids and Oxycontin burst onto the scene. I'm here to tell y'all that fentanyl is going to make the Sackler family look like saints. And I want to let y'all sit with that for a second. It is time for us to be proactive and not reactive. We were reactive with crack, we were reactive with opioids, and y'all are taking the first step at somebody in Senate finally being proactive. I truly believe in my heart that this bill will stop the supply and can help stop the supply of fentanyl. But in part of being proactive, gentlemen and women and ladies, I have to be frank and tell y'all that if we don't talk to the other side of Capitol Hill and stop the demand, we are going to spin our tires in the mud. Y'all are taking the first step, but I encourage you to take it outside of this room and you take it to your colleagues and your constituents and you give them the most that you can. I know I've got a few seconds here, and Senator Brown said I may or may not go over. All I want to say is that I not only encourage y'all to do this, I encourage y'all to take it a step further. At every concert I perform, I witness the heartbreaking impact of fentanyl. I see fans grappling with this tragedy in the form of music that they seek solace in music and hope that their experiences won't befall others. They crave reassurance. These are the people I'm here to speak for, y'all. These people crave reassurance that their elected officials actually care more about human life than they do about ideology and partisanship. I stand here as a regular member of society. I am a stupid songwriter, y'all, but I have firsthand witnessed this in a way most people have not. I encourage y'all to not only pass this bill, but I encourage you to bring it up where it matters, at the kitchen table. Thank you for your time.
I'll begin with Mr. DeFord. Through your music, you've managed to make people across different communities feel heard by speaking about the challenges and struggles Americans face. When we spoke briefly before the hearing, you used the term you're a man of service. I've heard you say that publicly. You said it privately. I appreciate that. It's part of your recovery that people recovering from addiction need to have a group of people speaking for them that look like them. We have experts who speak to numbers and stats, but from your point of view, describe the everyday struggle of addiction, if you would.
I mean, it's nothing less than devastating. It is truly the biggest crisis I've seen in America. I'm sad. I'm almost 40 years old, Senator Brown and Senator Scott. I have lived long enough to see almost every form of drug that has came across since the 80s. And I grew up in a household that had multiple addicts and alcoholics in that household. I have seen drugs from an early age, and I can tell you that every alcohol I've seen and every drug I've seen, nothing has held a candle to what's happening with fentanyl in the United States of America. I'm seeing people shatter. I'm seeing families get broken. I'm seeing, like I spoke about in my speech, it's important to note that the real victims there's a quote that says, the addict isn't the only person in the family that suffers from the symptoms of the addiction. The entire family suffers with the addict. The entire family rallies around the addict and carries that. The addict is not the only victim in this. It spreads far.
Thank you. Most of us up here can't sing all that well, but what we can do is legislate. What kind of signal would it send to the people you talk to who struggle to feel heard and seen if we come together in both houses, as we have in the Senate, 23-0 here, and then the Senate floor? If we can do that in the House, what kind of signal will it be sent to the people whom you're fighting for?
It's immeasurable. It's immeasurable because from the outside looking in, we don't see nothing happening in D.C. except fights. All we see is war and all we see is division. And it makes us feel unheard and unseen, and it makes us feel like our problems will always get caught in the middle of some kind of a partisan issue. And you and Senator Scott coming together and this committee has taken the first step that I think could be the beginning of the change that is needed in America, not just D.C., because this isn't the only bipartisan bill that needs to be spoke about. It's the mountain in front of us. But there are many mountains behind that one that must be spoke about too. And I applaud y'all for taking the first step, because me being here, I know for sure that some of my people are watching this right now, and for the first time ever, we feel heard. The voiceless feel like they have a voice in Washington, D.C. today, and I carry that with pride as I stand here with y'all.
Thanks.
Jelly Roll, quick question for you. As you know, your family in Charleston, the Propes, are very close friends of mine. I called them just to say, hey, tell me about Jelly Roll. The one thing they said was that he is authentic, he is sincere, and he speaks about the issues that has impacted his life.
Yes, sir.
And as a kid who grew up in poverty, I will say that sometimes the unseen and the unheard feel invisible. And one of the things that you're doing today is you're making visible those who still today feel like because of who they are, where they live, or what they do, they are somehow invisible. The challenge, of course, with drug addiction is it doesn't know a class or a race or a place. It's everywhere. Can you talk about the fact that, indeed, what we're talking about today impacts across all segments of our society in a devastating way?
Senator Scott, thank you. I was hoping to share this, so you bringing it up means a lot. I have the opportunity to go sing at dozens of rehab facilities a year and dozens of jails and prisons. Every time we do a show in a city, we go to their local jail or their local rehab and sing songs for them to encourage people. And in rehabs across America, I can tell you with certainty, I have seen everything from governors' children's in the same rehab as kids that have been homeless since they were 12. I mean, when I tell you that this drug, it has finally reached to the point, like I said, that we used to look at addicts and shame them, but now it's hard to, because the rest of the world's finally realizing that the addict is actually their nephew. It's their cousin, and they know their cousin was a good person. They know that this isn't the actions of the cousin they know. They know this is the actions of the drugs. Senator Scott, Chairman Brown, I assure you that this touches every single human, white, black, every ethnicity, every race, everywhere in the United States of America. It is touching and hurting people and killing people. And that's why what y'all are doing is so important. It's bringing people together. It's making the unseen felt seen. The voiceless have a voice, and we can't thank y'all enough for it.
Thank God that Congress can come together, not in a bipartisan way, but in a nonpartisan way to address the issues and the challenges facing Americans all over this country. And I certainly hope that my friends in the House are paying attention today, because it not already being law is a travesty. And I certainly hope my colleagues on the other side of the Capitol will take up this fend off fentanyl and get it done.
Thank you. Senator Tillis of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeFord, where'd you grow up in Antioch?
Sorry, I grew up between Priest Lake. I lived in Priest Lake for a while. Are you familiar?
I grew up in Trailer Park on Richards Road, went to Antioch High School.
Really?
Class of 78.
Yeah, we lived off, I was born in Bavaria Apartments off Haywood Lane.
I think they call it Country Meadows now.
Yeah,
right there.
I lived in Country Meadows at one point. It's right next to Apollo Apartments, right next to Pop's old car wash.
Exactly
Yes,
right.
sir. I'm very familiar with
I
that
went to
trailer
Apollo Junior
park.
High School. I also had friends who got convicted for drug trafficking and had one commit suicide after substance abuse really took his life. But one thing I've noticed, one thing you said that I think is very important, you said you see a lot of fights up here, and there are, but there's some good stuff that happened. And one that I hope I can get you updated on is a bill that we passed last year called the Safer Communities Act, because I'm sure you know, if you've looked at this the way I have, a lot of the people who are in addiction are self-medicating. They get there because they have behavioral health problems, they have trauma problems, they have a lot of challenges. We passed a bill last year on a bipartisan basis. Some of the folks on this committee voted for it, others didn't, but it's working very well. And it's helping expand behavioral health access. And we need help educating states like Tennessee, where I spent a lot of time, now I live in North Carolina, so that while we continue these fights, there's some good stuff that came out of this chamber on a bipartisan basis that will save lives. So we won't spend time educating you on this, but I'd love to have the opportunity to educate you on this so that we can make sure it gets implemented well in Tennessee. I'm doing my part in North Carolina. But thank you for being here. I look forward to the opportunity to speak with you separately.
I'd be honored. I believe that mental health and drug addiction go hand in hand.
We have this bill that in a pilot form, and one of the states that implemented about 7 years ago, we had a 50% reduction in mental health incarcerations. 50% reduction statewide. That says a lot about folks getting vectored into care that really makes a difference. So I'd like your help on promoting that, and look forward to meeting with you. I also think we have to talk about the border talk. There is a fight going on right now on border security, and this is why you should be concerned with it. It looks like a fight, but we have cartels making about $1 billion a year, charging people a fare to get across the border, anywhere from $5,000 to $55,000 to come across the border illegally. They are making, according to the DEA, somewhere on the order of $1 billion a year now, and they are plowing that money right into poisoning our country. They have these things called the Sinaloa Air Force, where they're taking ultralights and landing, coming across the southern border, landing, dropping off drugs. Senator Menendez is right. The majority of them are coming through legal ports of entry. Part of that can be fixed by technology, but a part of it can be fixed by actually having Border Patrol patrol the border and legal ports of entry versus being engaged in the millions of people coming across the border illegally. We have to realize that we have to fix this, and we have to interdict more drugs, and we do have to hold China and Mexico more accountable. Well, thank you all. Mr. DeFord, I am sincere when I say it looks like we lived in the same trailer park, but we also have a common background, and I'm very, very serious. I need help educating people, not once and done. What we do here is you pass a bill, and then you hope something happens. I want to make damn sure what happened in the 5 states that implemented the Safer Communities Act happened in Tennessee and across the country.
Yes, sir. You have a friend in me. I'd love to talk.
Thank you.
Mr. Ford, though it's not obvious, he graduated a few years before you did. Yeah.
It's also obvious he might be the only person in here as Southern as I am.
I don't think so, actually. Yes, the guy sitting to your left and a few people up here, John Tester isn't one of them, Senator Tester from Montana.
Yeah, I'm going to start with a slightly, maybe a little bit lighter note, because I want to acknowledge Mr. DeFord and personally thank him. I know you were in Bristol, Virginia recently for a concert, and that you actually went next door to Abingdon and saw the softball team and kind of cheered them on. I'm grateful for that. And I know you recently as well were closer to Richmond and visited a prison in Chesterfield.
Yes, sir.
I'd love you if you could share briefly with some of the experiences you felt, particularly with some of that prison community in Chesterfield.
The HEART program, sir, is what it's called, and that sheriff down there has really got his hand on what he's doing. There's another sheriff in Flint doing great things that are similar. He is focused on rehabbing drug addicts in jail. It's actually the only jail in the United States of America that will allow you to come in without a crime. If you are just a drug addict that wants to get off the streets and no rehab will take you and you are indigent, they will allow you to come into that jail and join the HEART program to get sober. And I think that's incredible. But, sir, I do that as often as I can, and rehabs all across America. And the saddest part is you just see the same thing. You just see heartbreak and despair. But yes, sir, that was incredible, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that guy in Chesterfield really has that sheriff really has his hand on the pulse of what's happening in America.
Well, thank you for being willing to share your story.
Respectfully, not for a pat on the back, but we also donated our proceeds from the show that night to them. We cut the Chesterfield County Jail, the HEART program, I think a $30,000 check.
Well,
So
kudos to you. Thank you. And I'm also for maybe less prevalent, but visiting the softball team in Abington.
I was cheering for him, man. I paid for him to go to the championship. I'm always going to be a cheering for him.
Well, grateful for that.
Thank you.
I'd like to come back to you, Mr. DeFord, and to your experiences here. Here in D.C., I think there's often a disconnect between what's happening in the bubble of Washington and what American citizens are actually experiencing across the country. I think your unique experience can help bridge that divide. I was very touched by your opening remarks, and in particular, your comments about addressing the demand for fentanyl as well as the supply. We're here talking about a bill that addresses the supply, but I would love to get your perspective on how we might address the demand. I know you've thought a great deal about this.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's incredible to meet you, Mr. Haggerty, Senator Haggerty. Being a Tennessean, I am very, very respectful of all that you've done for our state. Not only do we have the second biggest mortality rate, Nashville actually was the second most dangerous, deadly metropolis in America for fentanyl behind Baltimore. I had a meeting with our mayor about it recently, and just to the actual demand of it, I think there's not a proper education about it. I don't think there's enough resources for people to learn about it. There's not enough affordable rehabilitation centers in the state of Tennessee. These are all things I'd love to talk about. I think we're scheduled to hang out with each other soon anyways, and I would love to discuss with you. But I live in a very juxtaposition here where I understand the drug dealer and the addict because I have played the position of both. And unrelated, but to Mr. Kennedy's point, I agree with you, Senator Kennedy. I believe that chart is about as ass backwards as it could be, excuse my language. But Mr. Haggerty, I thank you for asking. And I only said that I see this bill as truly helping stop the supply. But as always, the problem with Capitol Hill is that's a bunch of y'all in here fighting to fix half the problem, and we do have a whole problem here, Senator Haggerty.
Well, I look forward to continuing our discussion about that when we meet together later today.
Thank you.
Again,
thank you. I'm excited.
I would ask, beginning with Mr. DeFord and the rest of the panel, to just comment on why you think this legislation is so critical and how it would be helpful.
I think, first of all, I think that this piece of legislation is extremely helpful because it's stopping the core of the supply. It's stopping the supply chain and doing everything we can to put a kink in that. But equally, I think any bill that is bringing attention to what I think the most brilliant thing said up here today is when my friend next to me said that, what does it take to make it a crisis? Are we going to wait until it's 500,000 people a year? Because I tell you what, we are really close.
Thank you.
Mr. DeFord, I've been listening to your testimony from my office and all the testimony. Thank you for the powerful voice you bring to this crisis. Your experience, your voice, your music, cut across party lines. They bring people together rather than divide them. And as all of us know, nobody cares whether someone who's overdosed from fentanyl is a Democrat, Republican, or anything else. So thank you for your unifying force in addressing this crisis. You mentioned Baltimore City being one of the epicenters of the fentanyl crisis, and that's our state of Maryland, like others, has not escaped this scourge. If you could just say, based on your experience, whether there are any misconceptions that others have about the group of people who end up using or dying from fentanyl, misconceptions that people have that could help us better address this crisis.
Thank you, sir. I want the record to reflect I'm an Orioles fan.
All right.
I think Trinity's story is the main story that we can reference right now about the misunderstanding about drugs in America and about what fentanyl is doing, is that the drug addict is shifting, right? Is that it's not always the drug addicts now. Sometimes it's just the young lady who took a pill the night before Christmas to maybe get sleep, maybe get the anxiety of Christmas off. I don't know Trinity's story, but I'm sure within my spirit she didn't take that pill to lose her life. And I think that this, excuse my language, but I speak very bluntly, the days of doing cocaine in the bathroom with a stranger are long behind us. My wife and I don't even trust Tylenols that have been opened now. That's how scary of a place we live in. And I think that the biggest misconception about this is that if it hasn't already ended up in your home and you're listening to this thinking it never will, you are wrong. It is on its way to your living room, and I suggest that we stand up and do more as fast as we possibly can.
Thank you for that important message to everybody.
Jelly Roll, in terms of cartels operating around the United States, what are your thoughts there and what role they're playing right now to get the fentanyl distributed?
You know, it's funny. I've had a complete change in life. I used to side with the criminals, but these days I side with the law. And I believe that it's imperative that we do something about it. The story of the cartel sending drugs to America is a tale as old as time. It's just not as deadly as it is right now. Because to your point, people aren't overdosing because they're doing too much. People are overdosing because they're doing a little.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of our witnesses. for being here. I'd like to say to Mr. DeFord, Jelly Roll, I heard your sermon on the CMA, and I was wondering what you're doing on Sunday. You know well from your experience that the war on drugs began in 1971, ushering in federal and state policies that resulted in an explosion of drug-related arrests. Your family's been impacted by this. You've been impacted from 1975 to 2019. The United States prison population ballooned from under 250,000 people to more than 1.4 million. A number that Dr. King, whose birthday we will celebrate in a few days, could not imagine. I often call it the new Jim Crow. The consequences of incarceration can be lasting. In many states, those who have been convicted of drug-related crimes face significant obstacles in finding a job, securing a place to live, even voting. And so the very forms of discrimination against which Dr. King and others fought have been reinscribed within the context of America's criminal justice system. And as I've said before in this committee, my fear is that if we treat addiction simply as a law enforcement problem, we will continue to hollow out entire communities to fill our overcrowded and in some cases privatized prison systems while leaving communities no safer. And so I'd like to ask you, as you've told the story of your past, when you were a teenager, you were arrested and served time in prison for drug-related offenses, including violent ones. How has that felony conviction on your record affected you, a successful rapper, a musician, a songwriter to date?
Yeah, I mean, I carry it in every way you can carry it, Senator. Thanks for asking. There's so many countries I'm not allowed into, which I never thought would matter until I start having hit records in Canada and Germany, and I'm not allowed to go. I'm not allowed to vote. Any core right has been restricted for me. I struggled to buy a home because homeowner insurances were trying to charge me premiums because of my felony. I mean, this thing has hit me in ways that we couldn't describe. I've had neighborhoods where HOAs just flat wouldn't let me live there because of my felony. I have seen the effects of carrying this thing with me. And my state has a violent offender policy where it does zero forgiveness for violent offenses. A crime I committed when I was 15, I'll never be able to get expunged. And I carry that still today.
So you in a real sense are the embodiment of a story of redemption.
Yes, sir.
Know a little bit about redemption, preach about it every week, and you embody that, and yet you live with this cloud over your head, unable to vote and struggling to buy a home.
It's hard to move forward when your past is always in your back pocket.
So thank you for that. I believe that most of the folk who are struggling with addiction need health care and need treatment, not permanent incarceration. There's a way in which, as you describe it, people are shackled even when they're not incarcerated. Do you believe that access to better care, treatment, and resources earlier on could have kept you out of trouble with the law?
Absolutely. And I want to be very clear that I believe drug addiction is a mental health problem, not a law enforcement problem, just so we're clear on the front end of that. I believe drug dealing is a law enforcement problem. I believe drug addiction is a mental health problem, sir. But I believe if I would have had resources in my juvenile years or more opportunities, or if we focused more on education and loving and less on discipline, especially with our youth, we could get mountains moved.
Well, thank you for your voice on this and ways in which you're using your music and your platform to help people who are dealing with addiction issues. But we need you to help us to get it right in terms of policy. Last year, I pushed for the Fend Off Fentanyl Act to allow for some of the illicit finances reclaimed by the government to go to the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to provide funds for substance use disorder treatment and recovery and diversion programs. The chairman committed to working with me to get my provision in the bill before it goes to the floor. And I look forward to working with Chairman Brown to ensure that this important provision is included before this bill passes Congress. Again, thank you so much,
sir,
for your voice on such.
I'm not educated enough to speak on this, sir, but I will say I have a feeling there's going to be more than enough money to go around.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, everyone.
Also, interestingly, join my colleagues in having listened to your music. And am grateful for the message of redemption as a California girl born in the state of Mississippi. There is nothing better than bringing together all of the genres of music that you bring and telling the story of not just your own journey in life, but your story of redemption and inviting your listeners into a relationship with God. And so I just so appreciate, I also am a parent. And when I listen to the stories of Trinity, or the 2-year-old that has been mentioned by Senator Britt from Alabama, it is hard for me not to think of my own 9-year-old daughter and America's daughters and sons who are going to be faced with this challenge, as has been noted in California. What California did was to, I think, try to speak to some of the issue of education and intervention that you mentioned before. Governor Newsom enacted legislation known in California as Melanie's Law. It came after a deadly fentanyl overdose at Bernstein High School in Hollywood involving a 15-year-old named Melanie Ramos. The law mandates that every public school in California provide training to school employees on opioid prevention and life-saving response under a formal plan known as the Comprehensive School Safety Plan. As a parent, I wanted to just ask, and Senator Daines talked a bit about the whole problem, and I appreciate you recognizing that and calling into the space that we are whole people, and this is a whole problem. I'd love to hear you expound a bit more based on your experience as an addict, as a dealer, and as someone willing to share your story, and as a parent. What more can we be doing, like Melanie's Law, but what more can we be doing to face the whole problem?
Thank you so much. That's an incredible question. I would start with a personal story that's probably more personal than my wife wants me to share, but we have a 15, almost a 16-year-old daughter, and like every 16-year-old, she has recently experimented with marijuana. Nothing to do with this committee, but for the intensive purposes of the story, I'm very pro-marijuana. But it petrified me because she was smoking cartridge pens, and I had heard a story of a cartridge pen having fentanyl in it, and I felt a fear as a father that I've never felt before in that moment. I'll also give you this as a testimony to how I do business personally. I take 10 buses on tour. We run a very big tour, and all 10 buses are required to have testing strips, Narcan, and defibrillators. I put them in all buses. We have sober buses, we have party buses. Even the sober bus gets them because I know sometimes it could be the Trinity effect of one guy relapsed and took one pill and he wasn't ready for it. I think that the act, y'all, the Melanie Act is one that should be across the country. I think that education is so important that these kids don't realize, like I said earlier, the era of when we were children and we could experiment with drugs is not safe for our children no more. There was a time in this country where you could experiment with drugs, and that time is not now. And I think that we have to continue to drive that home. I don't trust my daughter smoking tobacco because if I didn't see it get popped out of the plastic, I don't trust it. And that's sad because now we're living in fear. And nothing is worse for an American than to live in fear.
Thank you so much for that. Because you were willing to tell more than your wife wanted you to, but also because it leads me to my next question from Mr.